All right, we're going to make a foldable that has the rules in it for adding and subtracting decimals and fractions. I want you to take your piece of paper that I gave you today, turn it landscape, go ahead and burrito fold it, flatten it down, fold it in half, and where these creases are, I want you to cut. And cut this side. So now you should have 4 doors and an inside section. When you close the doors up, I want you to go ahead and fill in the outside to look like this. At the top it should say rational number because decimals and fractions are rational numbers. And I want you to write decimal addition and decimal subtraction on the left side. And on the right side, fraction addition and fraction subtraction. Okay, so on the left side we have rational number decimal addition. And on the outside of that flap, when you open it up, I want you to write, let me zoom in a little bit more so you can see just this section. 12 and 4800ths plus negative 10 and 636 thousandths. Now when you add decimals, you do need to line up the place values. So my tenths place should be aligned above the tenths place in my second number. Hundredths and hundredths, ones, ones, tens, tens, and the decimal should be lined up. Okay, so remember that when you add a positive and a negative number, you need to ask yourself, which one has more? Well, there's more positivity, so I'm going to put my number that has more on top. Okay, so 12 and 4800ths is on top, and negative 10 and 636 thousandths is on the bottom. Now I'm just simply going to subtract. I'm going to put a 0 in that empty spot. There was no number for 12 and 4800ths, didn't have a number in the thousandths place. So I just added a 0 there, because 0 means nothing. Anyways, and so I borrowed from my 8, made it into a 7. 10 minus 6 is 4. 7 minus 3 is 4. Okay, 4 minus 6, I can't do it, so I borrowed from this 1, and I now have 1 left in the ones place, and I brought that over, and now have 14 minus 6, and that gives me an 8 here in the tenths place. 1 minus 0 is 1, and 1 minus 1 is nothing. So I have 1 and 844 thousandths. And what rules did I just use? Well, first I lined up my decimals, and I simply added. You need to pay attention to positives and negatives. You need to use your rules for positive and negative numbers. So when you add a positive and a negative, that's which has more, and subtract, and we got to keep that in mind as we're doing this. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at how to add fractions. Let's take the example 2 and 3 tenths plus negative 3 and a fourth. Okay, I know that tenths and fourths are not equal measurements. That would be like me trying to add inches and centimeters. If I have 2 centimeters and 3 inches, that's not 5 inches. That's not 5 centimeters. Okay. There has to be some kind of conversion that takes place there to change them into equal measurements. So tenths and fourths, I need to change those into equal measurements. I'm going to look for the least common multiple of 10 and 4, which I know is 20. So I'm going to change my 10 into 20 by multiplying it by 2. And whatever I do to my denominator, I have to do to my numerator. So 3 times 2 is 6. And now I have 2 and 6 twentieths, which is the same as 2 and 3 tenths. All right, and then over here, I'm going to change my 4 into 20 by multiplying it by 5, and I have to do the same to my numerator. 1 times 5 is 5, and 4 times 5 is 20. So I have negative 3 and 5 twentieths. Now I'm going to add those two together. Before I do, I'm going to go ahead and change this mixed number into an improper fraction. 20 times 2 is 40 plus 6 is 46 twentieths. 20 times a negative 3, and that's a negative 20. So this whole part right here will stay negative. That negative sign's out here in front of the 3, meaning that all of this is negative, and when I change it into an improper fraction, that will also be negative. So I get negative 65/20ths. Well, when you add a positive and a negative, that's which has more. Well, there's definitely more negativity, and take the 46 away from the 65. That leaves me with negative 19, and my denominator will stay the same, negative 19/20ths. What steps did I use when I added those? I got a common denominator, I changed mixed to improper, I add it, and I pay attention to my positives and negatives. I have to use my rules for positive and negatives. Okay? Now, the reason why there's an arrow between step 1 and 2 is because you could actually do step 2 first. It really doesn't matter which order you do these two. I could have changed this into an improper fraction first and then got a common denominator next. So either way is fine. You're going to end up with the same answer. Okay, let's go down to decimal subtraction. Let's look at an example. I have 3 721 thousandths minus 25 3/10. And I, again, am going to line up my place value. My tenths place will be lined up with my tenths place. Now, since I'm subtracting this from this, you would normally put the number you're subtracting underneath the number that you're subtracting it from. But if you look closely, which one is a larger number? The number that I'm subtracting or the number that I'm taking it from? This number is larger, which tells me that I'm going to end up with a negative answer. This is like if I have $3.72 and on my debit card and I go off and I spend $25.30, I'm going to be in debt. Okay, so you've got to pay attention to that. So in this case, you could stay switch so that you can see that negativity is more than positivity here. If you want to do that, that's fine. Just to show you, I'll do it right here. But anyways, this one is the greater number. And when you add a positive and a negative, that's which has more. Well, there's more negativity. So, and then subtract the smaller number from the larger number. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm subtracting the smaller number from the larger number. 25 3/10. I'm subtracting 3 72 hundredths from it. I lined up my decimals, my ones place, my tenths place, and my hundredths place. I had to put a 0 in the tenths and hundredths place for 25 3/10 because there wasn't a number there. And then I went ahead and subtracted. I borrowed from the tenths place. I made that into, it was 30, now I made it into 20, and I brought over the amount that I borrowed. I took 10 away here, and I brought 10 over here, and I have 90 here. And so 10 minus 1 is 9. 9 minus 2 is 7. 12 minus 7 is 5. 4 minus 3 is 1. And then 2 minus nothing is 2. And since I was subtracting more than what I had, I already knew my answer was going to be negative. I have to put a negative sign on it. So negative 21 579 thousandths. When you subtract, line up your decimals and just simply subtract. Pay attention to positives and negatives and use your rules. Okay, fraction subtraction. I have 3 1/4 minus 2 5/6 here. I'm going to go ahead and change these into improper fractions. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 1 is 13/4. 6 times 2 is 12, plus 5 is 17/6. Well, I don't have common denominators, and to add or subtract, you have to have common denominators. I can't take miles away from inches. I can't take ounces away from centimeters. They're not the same measurements. It doesn't make sense to do that. So I know last year you guys learned banapples. You can't take bananas away from apples. They're not the same thing. Okay, so I've got to convert them into the same. Well, what's a good common denominator for 4 and 6? 12. 4 times 3 is 12. 3 times 13 is 39, so I get 39/12. And then 6 times 2 is 12, and 17 times 2 is 34. So I have 34/12. 39/12 minus 34/12 is going to give me 5/12. Okay, what steps did I use? I changed mixed to improper. I got a common denominator, and I simply subtracted. I have to pay attention to my positives and my negatives and use my rules.